Hey, so today we're going to be talking about arches, specifically low arches and high arches. Two common injuries or developments in your foot that can cause a lot of problems in that chain of movement in your legs. We're going to start off by talking about low arches or pes planus. Pes is Latin for foot, and planus is Latin for plane or horizontal. Just that flat plane that you see as opposed to the normal arch that you want in the foot. So, our causes and factors for low arches can be a variety of reasons. Of course, there's children who just have underdeveloped arches. They just don't have that strength built up yet. And that's totally normal, and that's something that they'll grow out of as they grow up. So that's not a concern necessarily, but it is a potential cause for low arches. But there's also obesity, which is where, of course, in this case, you've got too much weight bearing down on the foot, just too much for it to take. So, in response to the stress, the arch lowers, everything, the tension decreases as a coping mechanism. So, that might be a reason for low arches. Of course, we also have injuries to the foot. Any kind of injuries to the bones, to the muscles, and ligaments in the foot can cause side effects and laxations in the arches as, again, a coping mechanism to make things better in the short term. But this can often lead to a laxed or low arch. So we've got injuries. Now, in regards to specifics, first I'll throw out that fun statistic is that 20 to 37% have low arches. So you yourself might even have low arches. Who knows? But I did want to move on to a little specifics here. So we have a couple types of low arches. So we've got flexible low arches, which is where at rest, say you've got your knees hanging off the edge of your legs hanging off the edge of a table and they're just hanging there. Your foot is totally normal in that normal arch position. But in the case of in a flexible case, when you weight bear, when you stand up, that arch is going to lower. And in a reaction to the weight bearing. So that's flexible. Rigid, as you might assume now, is just where it's low all the time. So even while your leg's at rest under no weight bearing, that arch is still low. And that's just a more extreme case. As far as diagnosing goes, it's pretty standard procedure for any other foot injury. You're going to feel pain anywhere in your legs, your feet, ankles, etc. Because as we know, the foot, being the base of our body, connects to everything. So any arch-related issues can translate to pain in our legs, in our knees, in our calves, even our lower back. So just that kind of pain, you're going to see the doctor. They're going to perform a physical exam. They're going to test our range of motion. They're going to palpate. They're going to do all that good stuff and rule out any other possible injuries and just look at that arch and test to see if it's too low. And in some cases, particularly maybe cases to do with a sports injury where you might have bones that are messed up, other things like that, you might need x-ray or other imaging, but not usually. Generally, all you need is that physical exam, and you're good to go to begin with treatment, which is what we're going to talk about next. So treatment for our low arches is pretty standard for other foot injuries. This is a trend now. We got a lot of similar treatments we got orthotics and footwear. So for footwear, we're going to want that strong but flexible sole. And orthotics, we're looking for heel and midfoot orthotics, just to provide really good support. Of course, we've got our rice and pain relievers. I don't even think I need to write that down at this point. You guys know. And PT, which involves ball rolls, arch lifts, calf raises, etc. Just stretching out and building up strength in these ligaments and muscles, in the supporting bigger muscles like the gastrocnemius, to bring some of that pressure off of that ligament so that it can return to a normal state. So that is pretty much all I have for low arches. So moving on to high arches. So the causes, well, of course, we've got to talk about the Latin, don't we? So we have the pes cavus, which, as you might assume, is just concave, that raised, more concave than it should be. Now the causes of high arches are actually a little bit convoluted, a little bit tricky to talk about. It's a little different than low arches. It's not so much a structural, strength-based, injury-based cause. Really, it's a neuromuscular or neurological issue. So you got a brain pathway, a neuron link pathway that is just causing too much tension in the arch or in the muscles, or it's causing a muscle imbalance. Just too much tightness on one muscle, maybe not enough tightness on another muscle. So the reality is, we're not really sure why. It's kind of unknown. But we do know that it has something to do with genetics. But that's not to say there isn't treatment and diagnosis for high arches. Just a little bit tricky. Diagnosis, of course, again, begins with our physical test. You notice the pain in your legs, in your chain of movement. Maybe you're having ankle sprains, etc. So you get your physical exam. And they're going to perform what's called a block test. We talked about rigid versus flexible deformities earlier. So in the block test, they're going to be testing for rigid versus flexible deformities in the high arch this time, which is a little different, but it's kind of the same idea. So for this test, though, specifically, they're going to have your foot on a block. It's going to be placed under the lateral side of the foot. So you're going to have my pinky side. We'll pretend that's the lateral side of the foot. You've got that. And that first metatarsal, that big toe, is going to be hanging off. And if, while this toe is hanging off, if that allows the deformity to correct, if it returns to that normal arch, if it relaxes from there, then it's not a rigid deformity. But if it remains tight, it is a rigid deformity, which of course would just change what we're talking about for treatment. And that treatment, of course, now we've still got that trend going. For a non-surgical treatment, we're going to talk about orthotics and shoes. And specifically, this is just something that differentiates it. We're looking at shoes that kind of take stress off the midfoot, or the lateral side of that midfoot. So we'll say the lateral foot. And other than that, of course, we got PT and gastroc stretching. Just stretching that calf and just kind of just bringing some stability, trying to really just loosen up those ligaments and tendons. And specifically, we're looking at the dorsiflexion version. So you've got your toes extended. Dorsiflexion is where we bring them up towards our head. And that's the kind of stretch direction that we're looking to improve and build to loosen up those high arches. Of course, that's not all for treatment. Since it is such a tricky thing to deal with because it's a neurological, potentially genetic ordeal, we also have surgery. And there's a few types. So we've got gastrocnemius recession, which is just a fancy way of saying they're extending those ligaments and those muscles to just relax things. And back in here, they're extending things to just kind of provide some relaxation, some length to essentially lower the arch. And they also have tendon transfers. So we're moving tendons and where they connect to kind of balance out the tension in our foot, in our arches, potentially dealing with our peroneus longus, peroneus brevis, something like that. And as well as osteotomy, which is a fancy word for cutting bone. So they might make some incisions into bone, they might move things around just to try and get things back to a normal state. So that's pretty much all I have for arches. Thanks for listening.